Welcome to Real World, Real Talk with Dr. D.Z. Cofield. This show represents captivating conversations and insightful information to encourage and inspire you with all you need to become the best you can possibly be. And now, your host for Real World, Real Talk, Dr. D.Z. Cofield.
Welcome to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. D.Z. Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, KTSU. I want to thank you for being with me on this beautiful day. And we are talking about a very, very important subject that is life-changing and life-saving. If you hear this information and it applies to you or it applies to somebody you know, literally, you have the ability to change somebody's life and maybe even more significantly, save their life. I'll let you know what we're going to talk about in just a moment. Just a couple of housekeeping matters before you move forward with us in this show. If you'd like to follow me during the week, you can follow me on IG, on Instagram at DZ Cofield. You can follow me on Facebook at DZ Cofield, and you can follow me on Twitter at, you guessed it, DZ Cofield. I also want to encourage you to listen anytime by downloading the app. Just text the word app, APP, to 713-313-4354. Follow the links, and the links will lead you to downloading one of the most used apps on your phone, and that will be the KTSU app, because it allows you not just to access the music of KTSU live, but you can also access the podcast that we have of our show, Impact Houston Live, The Shift with Dr. Ed, and so many other broadcasts. Rashawn McDonald, Money Making Matters. He has just a tremendous show. All of those shows are available on the app and on our website as well. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and it's a subject that a lot of people don't like to talk about, don't like to admit that they have been through it, experienced it, or are experiencing it, and don't realize how much going through it has impacted them in their day-to-day living, how it affects how they see the world, how they see relationships. There's an old adage that hurt people, and we see many times the generational impact of domestic violence long after the initial perpetrator of the violence has passed away. And so today we want to look at that subject, Domestic Violence Awareness Month. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but we know domestic violence takes place 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We're going to give you some numbers and some information, who you can call, how you can find help if you're in a life-threatening situation, an emergency situation, what you can do to find the help that you need to become free of the fear that you presently live with. And if you're listening and you are a domestically violent person, if you are the perpetrator of violence, you may not mean to be, it may not be your nature. We're not saying that you're not a quote unquote good person, right? But here's what we are saying. Everybody needs help. And if we can help you find that help, we certainly want to do that as well. I can tell you personally, I grew up in a home of domestic violence and saw that seed of domestic violence germinating in my own spirit, and had to be very intentional and conscientious about addressing what I saw created as a generational pattern, and wanted to make sure that I did not pass on what I received from my children. And here's the other thing that's interesting. When I look back at my father and his violence and his anger and his temper, I also saw, as I went back in my family, the violence and the anger and the hurt that my great-grandfather had, his grandfather who raised him, and so on and so on and so on. And so, man, it's just so important for you to make sure and understand, and you've heard me say this before, generational curses are not things that are pronounced upon us. those are the things that we continue to perpetuate upon ourselves. Those are the things that we practice within our own family setting, and we end up passing it on to the next generation. I'm happy to welcome to Real World Real Talk two special ladies, Brenda Sykes and Sybil Winters Little. They are executives at the Bay Area Turning Point. I started to call it a ministry, but it really is a ministry. But Bay Area Turning Point is an organization that is committed to addressing domestic violence issues in our community and helping women and men find the healing and wholeness that they need if they find themselves in that kind of relationship. Welcome, ladies, to Real World Real Talk. Thank you for being with us on today.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for having us, Dr. Cofield.
Yeah, Miss Sybil, you doing all right?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here. I know this is a tough topic, but let's get started.
Yeah, it is. But you know what I find? So I said in my introduction, I grew up in a home of domestic violence. And I'll be honest with you, even now, like I cannot watch a show that has domestic violence in it. I just can't. I can't see a woman beat. I can't see a child beat. I just, it just affects me. They're movies that, world renowned and critically acclaimed. I've never watched them and never plan on watching them, so because it just brings back too much memory and it brings back a lot of trauma that I've tried to move past in my life. So let's start with just the basics. Let's define for our listening audience, what is domestic violence? Because I think when Domestic Violence Awareness Month was set aside, we had a much narrower definition and a much narrower thought about domestic violence than we do today. It's really expanded to cover, I think, other people, other groups. And so let's talk about first just defining what domestic violence is.
And so, Dr. Cofield, Sybil is our trainer extraordinaire. So I'll let her provide more insight. But just to address something that you said about not watching shows that has domestic violence in it, oftentimes people become desensitized to issues because it becomes a norm. It becomes a norm for them. So if you're seeing it on the big screen, if you're seeing it through your phone, if you're seeing it on your tablet, if you're seeing it on your television at home, you tend to think that it's normal, and it's really not. Domestic violence and family violence, both of them, they're basically physically, mentally, emotionally, financial, psychological abuse and control over a family member, a spouse, a significant other. And then there are three aspects to it. There's domestic violence, there's aggravated domestic violence, and then there's continuous family domestic violence. So there's subsets. And it's relevant amongst most communities. Every community. It doesn't have a socioeconomic status, a particular race, gender, ethnicity. It happens to everyone. And so we appreciate the ability to elevate the concern and issue of domestic violence. And Sybil, if you want to go into more detail about the definitions.
So, I like to relate things so that people can get it. And so domestic violence is the hidden cancer, right? It's the thing that's happening in your family that no one talks about. It's the thing that's happening in households that no one wants to talk about, and let alone not just talk about, address. And so, Dr. Cofield, when you talk about your childhood memories, you can't even watch a movie. That's what we carry with us. And so how do we gain healthy relationships if we're carrying all that with us and we've not addressed those issues? And so in our community, it's important that we recognize what domestic violence is, and then we'd be willing to be a part of the solution. So power and control on another person, getting them to do what you want them to do, whatever means that takes. That's how domestic violence is in a family. And then the children who are watching, right? What happens with them? How do they grow up? And Dr. Cofield, you know that firsthand, that experience, and,
Right.
and is the expert on that and can tell us what that looks like and how that feels. We see families come into our program all the time, and they're broken families, ready to be healed and ready to start over. But there are a lot of fears that come with that.
So, Ms. Sybil, I want to, as I would say if I were in church, put a quarter in the meter and park there for a second. I think it's important as we define domestic violence to help people understand what it is, because so many times I would hear people say, well, I didn't have to go to the hospital, so it's not domestic violence, right? Or, you know, well, I didn't leave any bruises on her, so it's not domestic violence. Or I didn't put my hands on her, so it's not domestic violence. And I want you to help people understand, because the last definition that you gave, this exerting of power and influence. I was just counseling with a couple, and it was really, really sad, because based on what you're saying, even though he has never, to my knowledge, put his hands on her, just listening to her and the brokenness of her spirit, and, you know, they're separated now. But just listening to what she says and everything, I'm thinking, you know, yeah, she was in an abusive relationship with this dude, you know, because he was trying to control her, trying to control her financially. And let me say to our listening audience, being a Christian, being a person of faith, does not solve a domestic violence relationship. There are domestically violent people who are in church, who are officers in the church, sing in the choir, who are pastors. And I say that, and please, you can write me if you want to, but I know that's the case.
Yeah.
No, I know that's the case because my father was a pastor, you know, and what was interesting was he was violent before he rededicated his life and gave his life to the Lord, and he was violent afterwards. And what I learned in looking at his life, and what has helped me to forgive him and move forward, is the fact that that hurt, that trauma that he went through in life was unresolved. It never got solved.
Right.
And so while I don't doubt his salvation in terms of heaven, you know, he was still a monster on earth. You know, he just found some scriptures to justify some stuff, and just kept on doing what he was doing. And so help us really think through, because typically when we define something, we go to the extremes.
Yeah.
You know, like if I was really angry, I'd have cussed you out. You know, I didn't cuss you out, so I wasn't really angry. You know, if I was really violent, you know, you'd be in the hospital right now. You know, help our audience understand, both those who are victims and those who are perpetrators. Help them understand, you know, how simple this definition is and how devastating and damaging it could be if you don't really realize what domestic violence is.
Agreed. And so, painting the picture, intimidation is one of the major tactics that is used. You don't ever have to hit me for me to be afraid of you, right? But you can use tactics that make me pause in my engagement with you. For example, hitting the wall, just missing my face. No, you didn't hit me, but I realize there's some tension, there's some strain, and there's some fear there. So
Right.
I may not come up against you if that's what you're going to do when we have a quote unquote discussion, right?
Yeah.
I'm the homemaker. I'm home with the kids, and so financially, I have to ask for permission to access the bank account. I have to ask for my allowance to buy the groceries for the home. When a relationship is supposed to be of equality, that we both have a voice, we both should be free to discuss whatever is going on in the home without there being ramifications, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it's mental, whether it's spiritual. You know, if I go to church, I don't want the Bible to be thrown against me and at me, you know, and you interpret the Bible for me when I just heard the pastor say, this is what that verse means, but you're saying, no, this is how it applies in our home, and I'm the head of the house, and that's how that works.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I just did a show on marriage and roles in marriage, and it's amazing to me how even people who say they believe the Bible, even if you believe in roles, right? Even if you believe the husband is the head of the household, that's a responsibility to love in an even greater way and to protect in an even greater way and to understand. That's not a justification to mistreat somebody. That says you have a greater responsibility to love and take care of and protect. And I heard a really wise woman say, love doesn't hurt. I think her name was Sybil Winters Little.
Yes.
But
And
that
Dr.
love
Cole,
doesn't hurt. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, but one top isolation as well. So, we talk about safety and healthy relationships and things of that nature. Now, on the last show, I told you I was at a church. Well, I heard a pastor tell the audience that having a piece of man is having better than having no man at all.
Oh my
And so
God.
when you talk specifically to the religious aspect,
Yeah.
I mean, if you take it back to slavery, the Bible was used to manipulate
Right.
slaves into to submission or to believe that they had to honor their masters.
Yes.
Well, if you take it up to the context of domestic violence, it's a manipulation tool, and it's designed to get you to do what the perpetrator wants you to do. So there is a higher responsibility to people in clergy, people that are in their positions of authority, to use their voices in a way that benefits the collective and not skew or uh, interpret things or put things out in a way that jeopardizes the safety of those that are listening. I think I told you last time I barely could sit in my seat. I did and I've never set foot back in that church
Yeah.
since. But I can only imagine if there was someone coming looking for a word. I'm gonna go to church and I want to hear from the Lord. And then the pastor is someone who's supposed to be delivering the word, right? I may have never picked up a Bible in my life. And then you say having a piece of man is better than having no man at all. And it was around the context of not having people get into your relationship. Well, if you see something and it's not healthy, if you've seen a family member become isolated, reserved, they're maybe wearing longer shirts and it's not cold outside, or their attitude has changed. There could be things or dynamics that's going on within that relationship that they don't want to talk about. And
Yeah.
so we don't also encourage people to go tell them leave. What we do is encourage them to connect them to places like Bay Area Turning Point, because we've been trained. Because if you are telling someone that you love, you need to leave someone that you love, you tend to not converse with that person anymore. You
Right,
tend to
right.
become further isolated. And so there is the cultural component of it, the religious component, all the things that Sybil said. But when someone wants to control every aspect of your life, you are in a domestic violence relationship. Believe it or not, you're in it.
Yeah.
And it's time to get help to get out of it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you can see a broken arm or a
Mhm.
broken leg, but you can't see a broken spirit or a
Right.
broken mind. And a lot of people are walking around in a state of brokenness.
Mhm.
And for some of them, brokenness has become so much their norm that they don't even realize that they're broken. They don't even realize that they are acting out of not who they should be, but who they have been made to be and made to feel. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, KTSU, KTSUradio.com on the World Wide Web. And I want to thank all of my friends and family who are watching around the world on various social media platforms. Talk about Bay Area Turning Point specifically and what
Okay.
you all do, because I think it's important for people to know who's on this show and the kind of organization you represent.
Well, thank you for that. Well, first of all, Sybil's been with here 25 of our 30 years of existence. We literally just celebrated 30 years of being able to provide services, life-saving services to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Right?
Mhm.
We've been doing this for 30 years. We have a shelter that can house up to 72 individuals at any given time. COVID has shifted that for us, but we'll talk about that a little later. We have a hotel program where if our shelter is full and they need to get out because they're in a high lethality type of situation, we're able to place them in a hotel for about 7 days or more to get them into another safe place. While they're at the shelter, they get food. They have a child care center. You have caseworkers that work with you on goals that you've set for yourself. We don't tell people what they need to do. We meet them where they are so that they can elevate themselves, because we don't want to replicate the very power and control that they're coming from, right? So we have that service. And then we have counseling. So we have people that are trained in the area of domestic violence and sexual assault to talk to children in a certain way, to talk to adults in a certain way, and to talk to the entire family unit so they can continue to get the healing that they need. We also have 24-hour crisis response. That's our hotline, but that's also a staff member meeting you at the hospital, at the police station, or even going with you to court to stand in as your advocate, to be a support when you're going through something like domestic violence and sexual assault. The system is designed so it's so convoluted and so cumbersome that people often give up before they can even make it to, I did the protective order, but now I filed a police report, now I got to get the protective order. And they get intimidated. And so we have staff to walk them through that, to encourage them to keep going, and also providing the resources. We also have on-site where we have a sexual assault nurse examiner and a domestic violence nurse examiner that we partner with another agency. So individuals don't have to go into the hospitals with all the bright lights to be re-traumatized, and they're just trying to triage you and move you along. You can come here and be seen by an actual nurse that's certified, that can see you in the privacy of a room and help you overcome your abuse and package the stuff that you need to prosecute if needed, if become a victim of domestic violence. We also have a housing department. And I say that, guys, but funds are limited. We have it here, but we work with other agencies to make sure we can place individuals into housing for on average 9 to 12 months to help them overcome the abuse, to get them to a point where they can feel like I have my own space, they can get a job and sustain on their own. And then we also have our outreach, education, and prevention. And that's the proactive approach. So the reactive is the non-residential services, the residential services, the hotel. That's because the abuse has already happened. Our outreach, education, and prevention, we're trying to get into the schools and talk to children and community stakeholders so that the abuse, it can be identified. Children and others can know what healthy relationships look like, so it doesn't get to the point where you need the hotel or the shelter or any of the other programs. And that's basically a very summarized version of what we do, but it literally is helping people walk through their abusive situation. And Sybil, if you wanted to add to that.
No, I think you said it perfectly. But I do want to touch just briefly, Dr. Cofield, on, the age-old question that we get is, why does she stay? Why doesn't she just leave? And so we listed all those services of what we offer. And in your mind, you think, well, that's easy. Just leave. They have shelter, they have hotel, they have all of those things. Well, the most dangerous time for a victim is in the process of leaving. We will have a walk on next Saturday commemorating a victim who she left. He went into her home, shot and killed her, and shot her mother. And right now he's on the loose. They can't even find him. So the most dangerous time is that time. And so partnering with agencies like Barrier Turning Point so that we can help walk you through that process, because it's a tough process. It's not as easy as let me get my stuff and run right out the door. It's not that simple for a lot of victims that have been traumatized.
Can you talk a little bit about, and this is a subject that I haven't really heard talked about a lot around this issue. With the Me Too movement, we've seen a rise in awareness, a redefining of inappropriate behavior, the use of inappropriate language and things like that. We haven't seen the backlash yet. And when I say backlash, I mean backlash that would say, okay, you've kind of gone too far. Like we've seen that in, for example, protests around, the mistreatment of African Americans and systemic racism. And now there's been pushback around critical race theory and things like that. Are you all sensing that this awareness has been beneficial to your service? Or do you find people pushing back? How is this affecting what you all do?
So let me just put a plug in this sense. Earlier, Sybil said control and manipulation was a form of domestic violence. with the Me Too movement, I think it's been understanding that even when I've been coerced or forced into having sex or doing something sexual in nature that I don't really want to do, but I kind of go along to get along, that is a form of domestic violence as well. So I want to add that because we're not necessarily talking about sexual abuse, but under the premise of domestic violence, when you're controlled and coerced as an intimate partner, that is a form of domestic violence. So if anybody's out there, if that's happening, seek services as well. I want to say at the time of Me Too, when it first came out, I was the interim CEO, and there was a lot of hype behind it, and people were telling their stories and things of that nature. But that topic is so taboo. People don't want to say this happened to me in a real way. Getting on a platform and anonymously or using a fake name to say this happened to me, that is an outlet for some people. But actually picking up the phone, calling and coming in and facing what has happened to you, that's another animal within itself. And I actually learned that from Sybil when I first got here 10 years ago. Sexual assault is taboo. Most people who've been experienced or exposed to it, they'll come here for domestic violence, but we don't find out until 2 months later that they've also been a victim of some form of sexual violence. And so with the Me Too movement, I'll be quite frank, Dr. Cofield, this is what Bay Area Turning Point does on a daily basis. So we're not assessing the movement into what we do. We're just making sure that we provide the services for those who are brave enough to say, you know what, this happened to me, and I want y'all to walk me through it. Now, I can tell you our counseling has exploded. It's exploded to the point we have a waiting list of people that are coming in to seek services, and we're working to, it's not a long list, but people are really needing the healing. So promoting wellness in any form, right? And people coming in, we're seeing it as far as people coming in specifically for our counseling services. I mean, we have 4 counselors on staff, 1 in Chambers County, we have 3 here in Harris, and they stay behind closed doors from the time they get here to the time that they leave, working with people on their mental wellness. Sybil, if you wanted to add to that.
So the piece I wanted to add to that is, Me Too movement, that, for the lack of a better word, that was a trend. We all jump on trends, and in the moment we're working to do that. And trends do help, right? They do bring awareness. But every day, like Brenda said, there are victims who are dealing with sexual assault. And I think the difficulty in speaking out or coming out about your sexual assault is 9 times out of 10, it's a person that you know. It's not the boogeyman on the street. It's not the stranger hiding in the alley. It is your grandfather, your father, your mother, your teacher, your nanny. It's someone that you intimately know. And so who is willing to take the risk to out the person that claims to love them, claims to be the caretaker, claims to be an important person in their life? So that's a huge step. And then when you add on top of that our misconceptions about sexual and sexual violence, that takes on a whole new meaning. So that's a tough topic to discuss. It's a tough thing to face for a lot of our victims, but we're here to support them all the way through that.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, Dr. Cofield, when I graduated from college, I didn't think I was going to be in nonprofit work, but I had my own experiences in my family that God said, I know you had a plan for yourself, but if you're going to turn your life over to me, I have a plan for you. And so it wasn't until I got into this thing, I started in Baton Rouge on a board dealing with victims that have been sexually abused. And these were women 40 plus that had never verbalized the abuse that they had encountered. Wow. Women in church, women that were married to deacons, women that were connected to prominent individuals that never talked about it. And so for me, it started there. Then when I got here, it was like, oh, I don't want to do that. And God said, oh, okay, you don't want to do it, but that's what I'm going to have you do. And so now I'm able, even my own family, I can look back and say, oh, that's what that was. Oh, yeah. So now it's an opportunity. Now when you become informed, you can then go back to your family members and have conversations and elevate conversations. So those children that are coming up behind you or those generations, they're not exposed. You're exactly right. We don't just inherit generational curses, right? We have the ability to gain the knowledge that we need to gain so that we can confront those things and demolish them. My daughter, I have a 17-year-old daughter because I know I'm well informed now that Blessing through Bay Area Turning Point. Yeah, I'm leading this agency, but people such as Sybil and my predecessors taught me a lot when it comes to domestic violence and sexual assault. And so now I have real life conversations with my kid, and she's able to navigate situations differently, quite differently than what I did because I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about different kinds of domestic violence. We've alluded to different kinds, and I know that they're probably innumerable in terms of the different nuances of them. But if you can just help our listening audience understand, because typically when we think about domestic violence, we typically think of a marital relationship, a husband and wife, or cohabitation. But domestic violence is broader and bigger than that. Share with us and our listening audience what that looks like.
Yeah. So domestic violence is a current or former dating partner, right? A spouse, current or former spouse, a household member. You can live in the same household and be impacted by someone that you live. You're not in an intimate relationship, but you're in an intimate setting. And so that's another that's family violence specifically. Parents of the same child, you fall under the premise of domestic violence if there's any harm. Foster parent or foster child, and a blood relative, a person related by marriage or adoption. So if you inflict any harm, control through financial, emotional, psychological, physical, and verbal manipulation or exertion of authority, you are in a domestic violence relationship, and it's time to get help and get out of it. And IPV specifically, a huge part of what we serve, I'm sorry, Sybil, a huge part of what we serve is intimate partner violence. And that's when people are current or former intimate partners. And the Texas Honoring Victims Report, there's a report with TCFV that comes out annually, right? The 2020 report came out. In the state of Texas, in every county in Texas, unless there was no IPV homicide there were 255 Texans killed in 2020. Harris County represented the largest number of those who were killed by intimate partners, and that's women and men who were killed by intimate partners. And of those individuals killed, 55% were of the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so within this population of domestic violence, there's a subpopulation, people of color, and their cultural and family components that are allowed to happen, and things are dismissed because, oh, that's just how it is. And individuals are losing their lives because of it. And so just wanted to take a pause to specifically address people of color. It is no, that's not okay. What goes on in the home stays in the home. No, sir, no, ma'am. Or, oh, that's just how it is. Or, oh, I'm not going to let this person do this to me, and I'm going to assert myself in a way that's intimidating. Those are all characteristics and behaviors that are not healthy. That is not a healthy relationship. That's not something you want to stay in because it only exacerbates. And when you add stressors of loss of job, loss of income on top of those things, you get to the point where individuals start putting their hands on each other, strangulation and things of that nature. And so Sybil mentioned the young lady that was shot, but we also have people that have been, if you looked at the Gabby, her last name escaped me. The autopsy came out, she was strangled.
Yeah, Gabby Patino. Yeah.
Gabby Patino, right. And so, so just this cultural norms in BIPOC communities of the male bravado, or I'm in charge and you have to do what I have to say. Yeah. Those lead to incidents where individuals can lose their lives.
And under that umbrella as well, Dr. Cofield, is child abuse.
Yes.
That is considered a part of domestic violence. So children are being abused in homes. Elder abuse, as our parents age, they have to have caretakers. And so children are now abusing their parents. And so that also falls underneath that umbrella. And in very simple terms, because I want to reach every population that's watching this, very simple terms, have you been touched in a way that made you feel uncomfortable?
Yes.
If you can say yes to that, then reach out for help so we can explore your options.
Yeah, I think as you think about especially COVID, and if we can just talk about that for a moment, former First Lady Michelle Obama talked about going through low grade depression. I think the entire world has gone through global grief just with the loss of a sense of normalcy. Add to that the stressors around employment and finances and health and the fear associated with that. We're seeing the circle getting tighter around us. When COVID first got started, there weren't a lot of people who knew an individual. Now there are a lot of people who know at least one person who has died of COVID, not to mention the other deaths that have been going on that occur on a yearly and basis. So people die because they die, and then we add to that another 300,000 to 400,000 COVID cases of people who are dying, and it's just created a kind of grief and us not being able to come together and grieve as we would normally grieve.
Right.
We go home and we take those things out on our loved ones. Have you all seen an increase during COVID of reported domestic violence cases? Have we seen an uptick around that?
We absolutely have. And as a result of it, that's why we created that hotel program, because we needed to social distance. We needed to keep everyone safe, but calls were coming in at an alarming rate. Isolation is the first, like one of the main things in that power and control, isolating you from your family, from your friends. You're not going to work anymore, right? You're not doing anything social. You're not even going to church. Church is virtual. So that puts you in the confines of your abuser if you're in a volatile relationship or a domestic violence relationship. And now, I mean, you're staying at home literally all the time. And so when you have a moment, if you have a moment, because your abuser may be home as well, then you try to reach out and say, I have to get out. Our lethality scores, and that's an assessment that I'll let Sybil talk about, where we score like your lethality, like you're in a severe situation. The scores were out the wazoo, like 32 and 33 on a scale. Sybil, what's the highest number on the lethality?
45.
45. So we were seeing like 32 scores, 36 scores, an increase in the lethality of those calling, which means they're in severe relationships, volatile relationships that needed to get out. So we have seen an uptick. But let me say this, COVID didn't cause domestic violence, it exacerbated it. It made it rise up a little bit more. And like you said, the stresses of loss of job, not being able to, you don't have an outlet, not being able to socialize, not having the norm, and just it is for healthy people. it was stressful.
Yeah.
So when you already have those components, it just exacerbates it. It just makes it come and rise up. And as a response to that, we had to, okay, how are we going to still serve these people? So that's how we birthed the hotel program. But I'm telling you, after COVID, we're not going to get rid of it because we see the importance of it. And so we have seen an uptick in calls, but particularly single people. We're seeing a huge increase in single people calling. You know, you have families, right? Adults with children, and then you have just singles. And we've seen an alarming rate of single people calling to say, I need help. Mm-hmm. Can you help me?
Yeah.
People that don't have children. And we're not sure if that's because individuals that have children and with COVID and financial and economic hardships, they're trying to keep their unit together, which still isn't a healthy. We don't know if it's that. We don't know if it's just, you know, we still get family calls, but we've seen an alarming increase in single individuals who don't have their children seeking services. Sybil, if you wanted to add.
So COVID was a true definition of isolation. And so yes. Isolation, if you have no means of getting out of the home, reaching out to loved ones or to resources, then what do you do? And so the homicide and suicide rate goes along with that. You know, you're isolated in a home. And as Brenda said, in healthy homes where there's healthy relationships, there was a lot of negotiating, conversation, communication, trying to make things work. And then people who were losing their jobs in fear of, will I have my home after all of this? When will we get back to normal? And not seeing that light at the end of the tunnel. People, when they're hopeless or feel hopeless, they will do extreme things. And so, an abuser who's in a home, who quote unquote is supposed to take care and provide for the home, who sees no way out, oftentimes you see them ending their lives and their partner's lives.
Brenda, you mentioned earlier conversations that you're having with your 17-year-old daughter.
Mhm.
And I want to follow up with that for just a minute in terms of when do we start addressing issues of domestic violence? When do we start talking to our children about respect
Hmm.
and honoring people's right to their personal space and things like that? Because I've seen, and this was prior to Me Too, I've seen a number of young ladies who basically said, I'm not taking that. I'm not going to take what my mama took.
Right.
And I've seen a number of boys who are still growing up with that false machismo kind of attitude. And man, I've seen, boys and girls square off at each other. And I'm like, okay, hold on. This is not going to end well. And I'm not saying that, girls shouldn't fight back or boy, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's not going to end well. When do we need to start having those conversations with our children and with children in terms of respecting space?
I think as soon as your child is able to understand or they're incorporating in environments with other children, you need to start having the message. And the message is going to be different when they're 4 or 5 versus when they're 7, 8, 9 versus when they're 10 to 15 and 15 above. But you have to start having the conversations. I mentioned I've been here for almost 10 years. I started talking to my daughter when she was 7 about this. As I learned and as I gained information, because they don't talk about it in school a lot. They talk about bullying and low tolerance for bullying,
Right.
but they don't really have a long or detailed conversations about respect and boundaries or things. It's put in various places across the student handbook, but there's not a curtailed type of approach. So I've been having the conversation with my daughter since she was 7. But today, I know now that if I could have had the conversation when she was 5, I would have had the conversation. But it was awareness. Once I became aware of it, then I started to have the conversations. So she's the one at school now that's having the conversation with her friends because I've had the conversations with her. And now she has a boyfriend, Oh Lord, she has a boyfriend. And even the dynamics in a healthy relationship, making sure I made the choice not to, if I'm in a healthy relationship, for her to see how her mom should be treated. And if something is not so healthy, removing myself. I had an obligation to my child. I'm going to sit in a different seat though, because I work in an organization where I'm constantly exposed. So for those who are listening, just call us. We can do a presentation or provide literature or collateral so that you can enlighten yourself, educate yourself so you can do what you need to do for your children, because children often mimic what they see. And so I was blessed to be aligned with Bay Area Turning Point, having the conversations with my daughter at the age of 7. So she knows about boundaries and respect and when something is not right, healthy relationships. And a lot of that was by way of just, once I learned, transferring the information to her and not making her feel, if she's had an experience where I don't necessarily think that, oh, well, that shouldn't have happened, but giving her the tools so that she can address it herself, but always being available to support her. So yes, having the conversations really young. Our violence prevention curriculum, actually, we curtail it to every school age children population. So
Listen, I was going to ask, do y'all have like coloring books or something that you can, use with our children? Because that, to me, that's where you have to lay the foundation if you're going to break this cycle, and help lay a good foundation in the spirits of our children. Those issues of respect and respecting boundaries and looking out for each other and not trying to take advantage of each other and not trying to use my physical, strength or prowess to, bully anybody and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I don't, I don't want anybody listening thinking, okay, well, that, children's taking toys from each other is a part of life, life
Right.
lessons and whatnot.
Right.
No, I mean,
Right.
we got to teach our children early, and we got to lay that foundation early. What kind of things do you have in terms of curriculum and things?
So,
So, Dr. Cofield, if I can share one thing that I think as parents, our obligation to our children is one, being an example for them, but also being willing to have conversations that they can use those tools as they grow. An example of that is my children learn early on, no means no. Don't try to convince me otherwise. No means no. When I say no, no means no. And I wanted my boys to hear no means no, because oftentimes the when we get into sexual violence,
Right.
how they see no can mean, well, I just need a little convincing, or no means, let me stick around for a minute and she'll change her mind. I wanted my boys early on to understand when someone tells you no, you respect that. So that's a very simple teaching, right?
Yeah.
That it's not tied to domestic violence necessarily or sexual assault. It's just in general, respecting what people have to say to you and respecting those boundaries. And so our curriculum is based just on that. It's building healthy relationships. And what does that truly look like? And children oftentimes get into situations and circumstances and they don't know what to do. So they might see, oh, wait a minute, something's going over here with, these two people. What do I do? So also giving them the tools when they find themselves in a circumstance, how do they intervene in a healthy way as well? So we talk about bystander intervention, speaking up for others, teaching others, coaching others. Ultimately, what we want is to give the information to the kids, then they be a voice to their peers. Because kids listen to kids, not necessarily to adults. And so if we can get kids to be a voice to other kids, we can train the trainers and they can pass the message on. And we're hoping that at some point that generation will lead to another generation, will lead to another generation, and the message is there.
Yeah. I think you said something, so profound, and it's really helping our boys and girls to both understand the importance of boundaries and clearly communicate what is wanted and what is desired, and not play games with words, because I've heard even women say, well, I said no, but you gave up too soon. You're like, wait, whoa, hold on, now you're confusing me. Like,
Right.
if you say no, then the no is the no, and I'm gonna act, with the no,
Right.
and you say leave, I leave. Like, I don't stay, and then don't call me down the road and say, well, why'd you leave? It's because you said leave. Like,
right.
and understanding that even growing up in those unhealthy environments, even if we weren't the ones abused,
Mhm.
will create a lens through which we see the world. As we get ready to close, I want you to talk a little bit, Sybil, if you will, about overcoming the stigmas to getting help. And before we do that, Brenda, give the information for Bay Area Turning Point. If somebody is listening and they've been holding on, and I meant to do this earlier, and they need the number, and then we'll talk about the stigmas as we close out. But what's the number, the website,
I
how
think
people
we
can
get
get in
so
touch with
caught up in the conversation that we forget to do that. So thank you, Dr. Cofield. Call our 24-hour hotline at 281-286-2525, or visit our website at www.bayareaturningpoint.org. And there's an escape button if you just want to go and see and maybe send us a message. There's a button where you can click. So if you're in a situation and you don't want where you've looked to be tracked, then we can erase that for you. So we have that safety feature. Or you can follow us on social media. Our Facebook is Bay Area Turning Point. And I believe our Instagram is the same. And you can also send messages through there as well. We've helped people in a variety of ways.
And you also help people outside of the Houston metropolitan area.
Yes. So we service Harris, all of Chambers, parts of Brazoria and Galveston County. But I'll tell you, that's our primary service area. But if you call us from anywhere and need the help, we'll be willing to help you. You just have to make the call. And I do want to say, we're saying call our hotline at 281-286-2525. Houston is so huge geographically that there are not even enough beds to serve everybody who calls. And that's the shame of it. So getting to an advocate or the prevention so that you don't end up needing shelter is key to making sure that individuals, because I can't imagine you're saying call your hotline, but when you call, you don't have any space, right? But if you can link up with an advocate that can do safety planning with you, tell you the safest places to be when you're in a home, when there's an episode of abuse, tell you how you can connect to law enforcement, tell you your rights as a victim. Even if we can't get you a shelter bed or a hotel bed, hopefully we will. But again, the area we serve is the fourth largest county in the United States, according to the 2010 census. We haven't assessed the 2020 census data yet. And so with the growing population around us is, talking to an advocate, safety planning, knowing what to do, talking to your children, educating yourself, educating your family members is key. And you can do that by calling our hotline again at 281-286-2525 or visiting our website at www.bayareaturning.org.
All right, Ms. Sybil, let's talk about some of the stigmas, because there's still somebody who's listening who may know somebody who's in a situation or may be in a situation themselves, and they're hesitating. Can you help some of our people who are listening overcome some of these stigmas, these common stigmas that keep people from calling for help?
So I think we first have to address that anyone can be impacted. Anyone can be impacted, even myself. And I've been doing this work for 25 years. I still can be impacted by domestic violence or sexual assault. I'm not excluded. So there's no shame in the sense of anyone might need to reach out for help. I think the stigma of reaching out to others historically, especially Black families, we've had to rely on our internal resources and people around us, and have had to figure out how do we survive without having to step outside, because oftentimes we weren't able to step outside and ask for help because we were turned away just based on our color. Well, today we don't have to operate that way. Anyone can come in for services. Anyone can reach out. What goes on in your home, if it is not healthy, please reach out. Ask someone to help. Ask someone to help you figure it out. Counseling is not just for crazy people. We all can use a bit of counseling in our lives, because we all go through some type of crisis or trauma somewhere in our lives. So it is okay to talk to someone else. That's what we do anyway when we call a girlfriend and complain about what's going on in our world. We look for somebody to vent to talk to. I tell clients all the time, I don't want to go to counseling. Try it one time and tell me you don't like it. Yeah. It's your opportunity to be in a safe space. You can cuss, you can holler, you can scream, you can cry, you can yell, get it out. So then you can work on what's my next step.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. That idea of a no judgment zone and being able to, in a safe space, non-judgmental, be able to share what's going on with me, and to help somebody, to have somebody help me think through my situation, my circumstance, and give me a more objective view.
Right.
Where, I don't have somebody, because most of us, the truth of the matter is, even when we call our friends, we're not looking for new information. We're just looking for affirmation and confirmation,
yes.
Right? Which is why we don't keep friends around us who don't agree with us, right? Because when they don't agree with us, they will be like, oh, see, no, you're not a good friend, No, actually, the best friends are the ones that are going to tell you the truth, no matter what you're going through.
Right.
Ladies, I want to thank you so much for being with us today on Real World, Real Talk. I want to thank you for sharing the information. And again, that hotline number, if you're looking for it, maybe you had to get a pen or pencil to write it down, is 281-286-2525. That's 281-286-2525. That is a 24-hour-a-day hotline. And you can go to Bay Area Turning Point, no spaces, no periods, Bay Area Turning Point.org. Is that right?
Yes, .org.
.org. Thank you all so much. I really, really appreciate you being with us. The late Vernon John said, if you see a good fight, get in it. I always add, if you don't see a good fight, start one. And, the fight for the health of our children many times starts with the fight for our own health, our own wellness. As we stated throughout this broadcast, generational curses, generational problems are things that we perpetuate onto each other. It's not somebody pronouncing and saying, okay, I curse your family, but it's actually us dealing with unhealthy things and never resolving those issues. And then we perpetuate them to the next generation, and it's perpetuated to the next generation. And somewhere along the line, we've got to say, you know what? Enough is enough. Now, we're not going to explain away. We're not going to justify away. We're not going to excuse or make an excuse for somebody who is not treating somebody in a healthy way, in a respectful way, who is not honoring the personal space and boundaries that have been set by another person. I hope that tonight has been a blessing to somebody, to encourage you to continue on your path to healing and wholeness, to continue on your journey to becoming the best you can possibly be, and doing your part to make sure that we leave a great legacy behind us. Again, if you need help, if you find yourself in a domestically violent situation, or maybe you just need counseling, maybe you've gotten out and you just need somebody to help you make sense of your next steps, call 281-286-2525, 281-286-2525, or go to bayareaturningpoint.org. Until next time, God bless is my prayer.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Real World, Real Talk. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified of new episodes every week. Follow us via social media using the @RWRTDZ username on all platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To submit any comments, questions, sponsor opportunities, or future show suggestions, visit us online at rwrtdz.com or via email at info@rwrtdz.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you've been inspired to be the change you want to see in the world today. Until next time, be real, keep it real, and stay real.